Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Bonjour, guys, and welcome to episode 84 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today we have David Cunningham on, and I'm excited about this guest. We really talk a lot about Catholic school. And if you know anything about me, you know that I have a love-hate relationship with Catholic schools and church and all of those things. And so David talks about growing up in Catholic school and being part of a small congregation and how he never felt part of anything, whether it was his family, church, or school. And as an altar boy at his Catholic school, he found solace and comfort in that first drink of altar wine, which he describes as horrible. We also talk about finding your higher power, and David breaks down how he came to discover a God of his understanding. And so there is some 12-step talk in this episode, but I find that each guest brings a new way of thinking about recovery. And so I say, bring it on. So David talks about the God of his understanding and how it's continually evolving to this day. And at the end, David has a message for those of us who are feeling hopeless. And it's simple. The premise is simple, yet significant. Okay, let's talk about our guest. David Cunningham has been in the addiction treatment profession since 1990. He has served as East Tennessee President, Tennessee State President, and served as the Southeastern Regional Vice President for NAADAC. He has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Tennessee Henry A. Ash Professional of the Year in East Tennessee, the State Professional of the Year Award in Tennessee, runner-up for the National Professional of the Year, NAADAC, the Tim Karen Reed Ribbon Award for Community Achievement with Child and Family Services and helping prenatal chemically exposed children and adults, the East Tennessee Lifetime Achievement Honoree, and most recently, the Tennessee State Lifetime Achievement Award. He has also been made an honorary member of Clean and Sober in the Wind Motorcycle Club of Portland, Oregon. David is a passionate member of NAADAC, a member to those entering the addiction profession, and an advocate for those continuing to suffer from the disease of addiction. He is dedicated to the 12-step philosophy, leadership in the recovery field, the encouragement of others, and the promotion of sober lifestyles. And you'll see how passionate he is about helping others in this episode. All right, guys, on to the show. David Cunningham, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adina.
I'm excited for you to be here, and I want to start this conversation, like I do many conversations, with just inquiring a little bit about your deepest roots from childhood.
Okay, I am David Cunningham. I'm an alcoholic from Knoxville, Tennessee, and born and raised here in Tennessee. And, we were much of a minority being Catholic in East Tennessee. Back in my youth, it was a very small congregation, a very small school I went to. And, I recall, in my early years, never feeling a part of really anything, whether it was my family or my church or my school. And so that feeling of aloneness and isolation started long before I ever picked up the first drink. And as an altar boy in a Catholic school, that's where I picked up my first drink. And sipping the priest's wine and tasted horrible, but it gave me a sensation that everything was going to be okay. Almost like the magic elixir. Had 3 older sisters. My youngest sister is 10 years older. That could have been another part of that feeling a lot different, because my 3 sisters were all in school together and close. And then my father, over his years, had been pretty much a raging alcoholic. And I'm pretty sure my dad had major depression and a lot of issues going on. And, over the years and with my recovery, I've been able to do a lot of forgiveness around that and healing around that. But one of my sisters, the only one that acknowledges it, says that, we were raised with a terrorist and you would never know when things were just going to explode. And there was no talking. There was no really discussing things. A lot of family secrets. So that went on up through the fifth grade. I don't recall why, but our small Catholic school closed down and I was plummeted into public schooling, which was another complete shock because it was large and there were unfortunately race riots and all kind of stuff going on and so once again, even more reason to want to escape. So that's kind of where a lot of it started as childhood.
Okay. So it sounds like you didn't really fit in this in a small school in East Tennessee, and being an altar boy in church, that sort of gave you the first sip of this magic elixir, as you called it.
Right.
So looking back, do you feel like those early days had that formative milieu of identity? Did you feel like you found some support in the magic elixir?
Yeah, I mean, just anything to escape and make me feel different because I just felt like a misfit. And then, finally, as I got a little older and I found the culture that also did the same things that I was doing, I was off to the races. And I knew some of my family history. I knew that there was a lot of drinking. I knew there was drug use. And I also, for some really twisted reason, my dad was a big guy and a lot of people were kind of scared of him. And, I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to be a tough guy. I wanted people to be scared of me and found that, in alcohol and other drugs. And when I started running with those other groups of like-minded drinkers and users, I guess I was a bit of a chameleon. I could fit in just about anywhere as long as I was drinking and using.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So wanting to be like your dad, I think that's something that many boys want to do, and to emulate what they see as masculinity, right? And so,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and everything I was raised with around what it takes to be a man
Mm-hmm.
was so distorted. And honestly, it raised me to be somewhere along that point. I really didn't like myself at all. So
Mm.
again, I wanted to be something different. And alcohol seemed to lend to that, but just really almost a hatred for myself. It was very easy to hate anybody else that was not like me.
Hmm.
And, that was the very unfortunate culture I was raised in. If you weren't like me, I hated you.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a very twisted, distorted way to raise people, thinking that that's what it took to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
You had to hunt and kill things. You had to dislike different people because of their beliefs or whatever. And when I got in recovery, all that started dropping by the wayside.
Yeah. So David, I think maybe now is a good time to talk about maybe your recovery journey. I know you've already mentioned that you found this group that was doing the same things you were doing. How old were you at that time?
Oh, it really probably started kicking in about 15 years old. And again, I did not know all my family heritage, but I knew there was German, Czech, Scottish, Irish, and I knew my great grandmother was full blooded Cherokee Indian.
Mm.
Up until about a year ago, I found out my other great grandmother was full blood Choctaw.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
so I was genetically set up for
Mm.
disastrous drinking, being a Heinz 57, if you will. So I believe when my drinking and drug use started around the age of 15, it wasn't maybe, but the first drink or two or drug or two that I'd already crossed the line.
Okay.
I was headed off to the races at a fast pace in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm wondering, what like, did you get any input from your family at that time? Were they saying like, hey, maybe you're going down the wrong path, look at dad, or were those conversations happening at all? Or
Oh yeah, they were disturbed with my drinking and my drug use, and it was probably very obvious to them. But that just kept putting me a little deeper into it, quite
Mm.
honestly. I'm sure I had some guilt and shame around it
Yeah.
even then. But at that point, I mean, there just wasn't really that many people, particularly younger people, to talk to in recovery. I mean, if I'd have had some of the young people stuff that are available today,
Yeah.
where somebody would have talked to me in recovery and went, hey, I was just like you, and here's what it's like today. I think it would have possibly been a profound difference if I'd have thought somebody that really understood.
That's a great point. So then when did you decide to seek help?
Well, it had to get much, much worse.
Okay.
I rodeoed growing up, showed, broke, trained horses,
Wow.
and did a little bit of everything in the rodeo circuit, which was also a big drinking. Not so much drug use then, there was some, but a lot of drinking atmosphere. And then when my drug use kind of took off, I didn't want to be around those people because I want to be around other people doing the same thing as me. And so ended up losing all that and got into some other cultures. I was always a mechanic and enjoyed working on motors and engines and fell into the motorcycle groups and
Mm.
started riding Harleys and all the wonderful things that came along that for me. And I had several serious accidents, a lot of
Mm.
DUIs, drug arrests, and I'm sure everybody was sitting back going, "Oh my God, it's terrible for this guy. What's it going to take? I mean,
What's it going to take? Yeah.
how bad is it going to have to get?" And in the '80s, I went to treatment 5 times for back problems. I think the first one was to get people I knew off my back. The
Mhm.
second was to get family off my back. It was all these back problems I had. And another one was to save a job. And,
That's
the
funny.
list went on. And so 5 treatments in the '80s. But when I left, I did not do anything that was suggested. And I tell people that today, if I had followed the suggestions in the first treatment I went to, I'd have probably got clean and sober then. But I was
Right.
just not willing to do some very simple things that they suggested. And so, trust me, things progressively got much, much worse. In 1990, November 11th, 1990, I finally decided I was done. I had tried priests, I had tried pastors. I had tried psychology. I had tried psychiatry. I had exhausted every resource that I thought would help me and didn't. So they had suggested that I go to sober living for a 6-month commitment. And, I was like, oh my gosh, it sounds like a death sentence, but I'm willing. I'm willing because I'm so tired of this life.
So I was just going to ask David, not to interrupt you, but what do you think led to you finally saying, I'm done. I've had enough.
Well, it was a number of things. I mean, it was even apparent to me at that point I had exhausted my resources. But one other key thing was one of my sisters had started going to Al Anon. And I came out to my vehicle one day, whatever time of the day it was, I got up and getting ready to go out and do the same old thing again. And there was a note in there that said, don't ever, and she was my greatest enabler, extremely codependent with me. And she said, don't call, don't come by, We've notified family and friends that if they see you, just to call the police.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, she cut me off at the ankles, and it was like one of my last hopes of having a codependent family member, and she cut me off. So I kind of knew things were done at that point. So that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. Yeah. So then you decide to go to the sober living house.
Yeah. And, back then it was really a kind of a fly by night halfway house at best.
Mhm.
And, knowing what I know about halfway houses and sober livings today, it was not much. But the good news was I had a wonderful house manager that just knew recovery inside and out. He had been in long term recovery. And so I listened to everything he said. I followed everything, every suggestion of the program, all the way down to like the one that I thought was like the most ridiculous suggestion was no relationship for the first year.
Okay.
And, but I was so done. I was afraid not to do everything they told me. And so I followed that as well. I mean,
Okay.
no relationship whatsoever, and had a sponsor and working the steps and helping others and doing service work and reading the literature and just absolutely everything they suggested. And to kind of speed things up just a tish, 2 years later, well, part of the way during this 2 years, I found I had an outstanding warrant
Okay.
that I had to go get that taken care of for 6 months.
Mhm.
So I tell people I was in a sober living for 2 years, but it was really about a year and a half. But 2 years later, I went, did a little stint there, came directly back to the sober living. That was
Okay.
my safe place as soon as I got released, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and came back there. And so it was 2 years later, they were patting me on the back going, you've been house manager, you've been this, you've been that. We really think you could probably move now. I
We're
didn't
ready
want
for
to
you
go.
to move now, David.
I didn't want to go for 6 months. And after 2 years, really didn't want to leave.
Oh, wow.
That was my safe place. It was where I felt like I'd been raised, really. So the funny side to that, a friend of mine and I from our home group rented the place right next door. They were like, "Wow, you didn't go far." I'm like, "No, this is home." Fast forward again, extremely blessed. The being raised with the God of my understanding as a youth, this one that was really not a nice God, was kind of out to get me and shaming and just all these, just wasn't all that great. And, recovery introduced me to a loving, caring God of my understanding and, I've got friends that, whether it's Buddha or Judaism or Mother Earth or whatever it may be, and we all get along just fine, with everybody having their own. But, it's developed into a relationship with a higher power that today that was different than anything I was ever raised with. There was a lot of, I felt like, religious abuse growing up. And so I really didn't want any part of that. And so, almost when some of the literature refer to God, I just cringe a little bit. But, finally I was just like, they say, you got to have this component of your recovery or it's lagging. And I thought, well, I'm in whatever it takes.
So, David, I wonder, there's so many questions that I have. One, I wonder what made the sober living so great, that you didn't want to leave, that you literally rented a place right next door. And then also, I hope if we have time, I'd love to get into how you discovered the God of your understanding, because that's a big question mark for a lot of people that I treat. Like, what does this
Certainly.
mean? Yeah.
Well, I really think it was my house manager.
Mm.
Steve was just a great guy. He worked a super great program. And, he would redirect me in a loving, caring way that I understood.
Yeah.
from one alcoholic addict speaking to another, I understood his language when he'd try to redirect me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot around him.
Okay.
And I did get to a point in my recovery where I was able to learn from other people's mistakes. And I saw people that were credentialed and were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
They were in recovery, but they had credentials at that point and they were struggling. But it was like they were beyond going and asking for help themselves.
What is credentialing?
Oh, that's, if someone has a
Oh,
LCSW,
okay.
licensed clinical social worker, or a licensed addiction counselor, or whatever it may be, it was like they didn't need to ask for help themselves anymore. And so as years go by and I went back to school and got credentials and all kind of stuff over the years, I just know how important that self-care for,
Mm.
even if you're working in a profession, that component of self-care is absolutely vital. And I learned that in recovery. If it hadn't been for that, I'd have probably failed miserably. But I saw some of these people relapse and, all kind of just horrible things. And so I still treat my recovery today a lot like I did in early recovery, almost like it's new every day. I try to reach
Mm-hmm.
out and help others. I read the literature. I
Mm-hmm.
still attend a lot of meetings, and COVID has not been friendly to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did notice I was going to be at home. I was going to be working in front of my computer. I was isolated at home, even though my family's here, but my
Mm-hmm.
fellowship friends and my work people and stuff like that were pretty much isolated at home. And so I knew at that point I was going to a fair amount of meetings pre-COVID, but when COVID hit, I was like, these are going to be Zoom meetings, but I'm going to have to up the ante. And I go to more meetings now than I did,
Wow.
pre-COVID. Actually, got one tonight.
That's
That's
awesome.
a group of healthcare professionals from all four corners of the country and between that we meet every Thursday night and Saturday morning, and they're all in recovery, and we kind of support each other that way. But there's a lot of other meetings I go to, and now with the Zoom meetings, there's if somebody wants to go to a meeting, there's no reason you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're. I look forward to the day people can experience the face-to-face meetings,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think there's a real parallel to that. But in the meantime, if you get served lemons, make lemonade, right?
Yes. Would you mind talking just for a few minutes about how you came to this God of your understanding?
Again, I didn't want any part of that. Matter of fact, I skimmed over that initially in a couple of the first three steps. And, there were some guys that just told me, when it came to that decision part, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to care of God as I understood Him. They said, that can be whatever is a power greater than you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be the God you were raised with. It doesn't have to be this or. And then they also said, all it's asking is to make a decision. You don't have to do any major major event or anything. And somewhere along the way, and I don't know the timeline on it, but I did make a decision. And, you know, I do believe that things like, as silly as may seem, my manager at my sober living, my group of friends like I had never had before in my lifetime,
Yeah.
were really a lot of developing a higher power. And then I would hear these I kind of laugh about it now, but I would hear these old timers that were talking about God. Not, I went to school in the '70s, and so there was a term called Jesus freaks back then. And you know, I probably called a lot of people Jesus freaks back in the '70s.
Mhm.
And I heard these guys just talking about God all the time, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in with a group of Jesus freaks."
Yeah.
And it wasn't that at all. And today, 30 plus years later, I get it. You become to depend, you know, on this power greater than yourself.
Yeah.
That is truly amazing journey. There's some things that happened in my recovery that were the worst things that happened to me in my entire life. I had no children before recovery. Thank God. I would definitely have been the worst dad on the planet. And so ended up getting married a number of years into recovery and, 5 children later.
Wow.
But one of those children is my daughter, and she was a twin. And I was 15 years sober, and we lost her little brother, which was the most painful thing in my entire life. And what would have been, and trust me, I knew how to fix any kind of pain, real quick. I had the recipe for that. But the real miracle in that was never once at 15 years sober, when we lost our son, did I ever once, even for a snippet of a second, think about checking out and going to my backup drinking and drugging. There's some miracles like that they're not, you just can't deny them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Your life now is so much better back then. I mean, it's so much richer and more full, and yeah, you would be giving up so much. It just
Oh
wouldn't be
yeah.
worth it.
And yeah, the whole parade was coming by for many years, and I missed the whole thing up until I was 30 years old. Kind of missed out on everything. I felt like I hadn't missed out on much of anything in the last 30. It's been a wonderful ride, a wonderful journey, and just extremely, extremely grateful. And I do try to think about others, reflecting back when I was a kid. If I'd have had somebody like me or some of the other people I know to talk to back then, or if they'd have talked to me and they, had been down that path, because parents and family trying to talk to me, none of them had ever have really understood the drinking and drugging as I did. And if somebody would have talked to me that understood, had been there, done that, I would have been like, I could probably talk to this person,
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't have felt so removed from everybody like you had mentioned. And David, I just want to highlight something that you said a few minutes ago when, we were talking about this God of your understanding. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I wonder if people that are struggling with, who is this God of my understanding? How can I identify this person or this being? And it sounds like for you, you took the best parts of these groups of friends that were in your sober living and the best parts of the sober manager, the kindness and the grace, and care that they were giving you, and sort of used that as part of creating this higher power.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of putting it. And I've never really thought of it that way. But yeah, I mean, just everything good and kind and generous and so on that you could think of, kind of bundled in one. And a lot of people's develops differently. I've heard so many different things. Some people just have this moment of clarity that something happened like right then. I don't recall ever having anything. I have a lot of God shots, I call them. And that may be driving down the road and seeing a beautiful red-tailed hawk flying through blue skies, or one of my kids pointing out something out in nature to me that I like to think that they picked up on from me showing them. Just some very simple things. I never had any kind of a burning bush experience, lightning, flashing lights, nothing like that at all. And it's been a gradual thing.
Right.
It's been a gradual thing. And there's no rush in doing any of it.
Mhm.
That was the thing, when they said, all you got to do is make a decision. You don't have to do anything right now. Just make a decision that you're going to start trying to turn your life and your will over to care of God as you understand Him. Again, that was a slow development, and I think it actually still develops.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I believe that. Well, this has been a really fun conversation to have with you, David. I'm glad that we were able to connect today. Are there any last words that you can think of that you maybe want to share with the A.I.R audience?
Well, just this month is the month of hope. It's a spiritual principle, and I think that was a big thing also in this whole God thing. this spiritual life instead of a religious life, and not so much man's traditions and this religious stuff, but spirituality. And there's a huge difference in that for me. For a guy like me that was completely hopeless, thought I was a complete failure. I mean, heck, I couldn't even do treatment and get sober 5 times. And so I was just a hopeless case. I felt like the people in the rooms that had befriended me when no one else would, I mean, I was cut off from everything.
Yeah.
These people were like, hey, we'll love you till you can love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you all are crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But they did. Hope for the hopeless. And I was definitely one of those. And so this month, second month of the year, first month is honesty in January, and this month is hope. I always love this one because being of the hopeless variety, I'm clean and sober today.
And where do you find these months?
It's the spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, okay.
And so you can look those up pretty much anywhere online. If you Google spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, it'll give you a list of them.
Yes. Yes. Well, that sounds like a great place to end on the month of hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
David, where can people best find you if they wanted to get in touch? Are you on the web? Yeah. Whatever you feel comfortable.
I am, I can be found on our website at augustinerecovery.com. It's augustinerecovery.com where I work. And my email is david@augustinerecovery.com.
Okay, great. And I will link to all of those in the show notes for everybody. So,
Okay.
all right, David. Well, thanks again for being on.
Hey, Adina, thanks so much for having me. It's been an honor. I appreciate everything you do, trying to get some good vibes and good info out to people, give them some hope.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.